Okay, I got a message. We're ready. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be watching here around the globe. It's our pleasure, the International Association of Youth Family Judges and Magistrates, IAYFJM in English, to welcome you to this webinar. We've been having a series of webinars monthly, rotating between our official languages being English, Spanish, and French. And you are here today at the English version, so English language version, and so we're very happy to have you. For those of you who would like to hear this presentation, perhaps in your own language, this presentation is being recorded on YouTube and will be available as soon as probably tomorrow in a variety of languages. But nonetheless, we're very thrilled to be here to offer this webinar on a very important topic that I think we will all find to be timely, and that is COVID-19 associated orphanhood. As we've all experienced in these last 2 years, really almost, the pandemic has affected everyone in tragic ways and subtle ways and very important ways, personally and professionally. And our thoughts, of course, are with all those who've been affected personally by tragedy as a result of this pandemic, and all of us who professionally are working with the families and the results that they've suffered as well from this pandemic. This is unheard of, I guess, phenomena that we're addressing here today. I think a very interesting topic. And so we're very happy to have three presenters here today. I'm going to introduce all of them. First, a little bio about our first two speakers, and also tell you that on behalf of the IAYFJM, we have myself as Deputy President, and I'm a judge here in the United States. And also we have our General Secretary, Andrea Santos Souza, who will bring up closing remarks in her presentation going third. But first of all, we have with us a professor at Oxford University and at the University of Cape Town, Miss Lucie Cluver. Lucie works closely with a superb team of partners, postdoctoral, doctoral, and master's researchers. Together, they collaborate with the South African government, UNICEF, World Food Program, UNAIDS, USAID, PEPFAR, and CDC, UNDP, IAS, the World Health Organization, Global Fund, with the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children, and with other international NGOs to provide evidence in the PI of the UKRI-GCRF Accelerate Hub, with the goal of accelerating achievement for Africa's adolescents through SDGs. We also have with us Dr. Seth Flaxman, Associate Professor in the Department of Computer Science at Oxford. Originally from the United States, Chicagoland, he has a BA in Computer Science and Math with honors from Harvard University and a PhD in Machine Learning from Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. He works at the intersection of computer science, statistics, global health, and public policy. During the COVID-19 pandemic, he was a member of Imperial College's COVID-19 response team, leading landmark studies which were published in Nature, Science, and the Lancet, and making regular media appearances. He was named Samsung AI Researcher of the Year in 2020. So you can see we have a very distinguished panel. And without further ado, I would ask them to make their contributions to all of our work and to our understanding of the issues involved here. And why don't we start with Ms. Cluver, please, if you're ready, go right ahead with your presentation, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Judge, and it's such a pleasure to be here with you and talking about such an essential topic. And I have to say, a year ago, none of us were thinking about this. We were all thinking about the absolutely essential question of vaccines and how we could keep people safe in a pandemic. But a colleague of mine, Dr. Susan Hillis at the CDC, contacted me and said, do you remember, Lucie, how we worked at the beginning of the AIDS orphanhood pandemic, when we were seeing millions of children orphaned by AIDS, primarily in Southern and Eastern Africa? And she said to me, how can we find out how many children have been orphaned by COVID? And that began an amazing piece of work, which Seth has been a leader on, along with many other leaders in statistical modeling, and also bringing in colleagues from the World Bank, from the World Health Organization, from USAID, from a range of organizations to think about not only the challenges of identifying how many children are experiencing orphanhood, but the crucial question of what can we do about it. Seth is driving the slides, so I'll ask you to move to the next one. And I think before we dive into the science of understanding how we did this, we have to take a moment and think about the reality of what we're talking about. This was a young girl, 16 years old, in Atlanta, and she wrote an essay for her English class about her experience of losing her father to COVID only a month ago. And she says, "I keep forgetting. I still forget. I see his truck in the driveway, and I think to myself, Dad's home, but he's not, and he never will be. He's gone." And so as we look through these numbers, and as we think about the policy, and we think about what we and what you can do as such important figures in family courts, we can also think about what this experience is for every child across the world. Seth, over to you.
Thank you so much for inviting us. Thank you, Professor Cluver. So I'm going to be telling you about a bit of the technical background, how we define orphanhood and what our estimates are. So the big picture here, we did a modeling study. What that means is that we wanted to provide estimates for every country in the world and globally and by region of the number of children experiencing orphanhood or caregiver death. So our study, which is published in The Lancet, covers data from 21 countries. In these 21 countries, we're able to get high quality data on fertility and age-specific mortality. So as you can imagine, if someone who's 90 years old dies, it's unlikely that they will have children who are their children. They might have grandchildren. If someone who's 30 dies in a country with high fertility, it's likely that they'll leave behind multiple dependents. So that's one of the key ingredients here, data on age-specific fertility, and then age-specific data on deaths. And so the gradient of the risk of dying from COVID, of course, we know it falls very heavily on older individuals, but around the world, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in the prime of their lives, parents, have also died from COVID-19. The 21 countries were selected so that we would have representation for 3/4 of COVID deaths when we started the study for the study period, March 2020 until April 2021. Other countries, unfortunately, have seen surges, especially India. We have updates to our numbers, which we'll share, and we extrapolate the numbers from these 21 countries globally. So let me just walk you through this figure. So 3 different categories that we consider. So orphanhood, we define following the UNICEF definition, death of one or both parents. Loss of primary caregivers includes orphanhood. It also includes death of one or both custodial grandparents. And I think you know better than we do that in many parts of the world, grandparents have stepped in to provide, be the primary caregivers for their children. So losing a grandparent can be devastating. And then finally, loss of primary or secondary caregivers. This last category includes the first 2. It also includes death of at least one co-residing grandparent or kin. And so this might be someone who lives in the household and is involved in some way in providing care. And even if they simply live there, let's remember that it can be a huge shock to lose a beloved family member, even if they're not providing care. Okay, so that's what we aim to estimate, these 3 categories. We use age-specific fertility and death data, as I already said. And here is the global picture. So we start our study when the pandemic starts to claim lives in the hundreds and thousands. By the time that this slide was made in the end of May 2021, we're up to millions. In purple, we have COVID-19 deaths reported. And so this is what you'll see in the news. This is what you'll see if you go to Johns Hopkins. This is what countries count when they say there were 1,000 deaths in this month or this year. And I'll come back to that later because in many countries, that's a significant undercount of the true toll of COVID-19. So there's other ways of counting the true number of deaths. But 3.6 million COVID-19 deaths middle of 2021, which is double the number at the end of 2020, 1.8 million COVID-19 reported deaths. Okay, so our estimates looking globally, what does that mean in terms of children? Talking about primary orphanhood, talking about children losing one or both parents, it's half. So 1.8 million COVID-19 deaths leaves behind 0.9 million, 900,000 children affected by the death of a caregiver. 3.6 million COVID-19 deaths leaves behind 1.8 million. As you can see, this is a pandemic in every country that has experienced it. There's been an epidemic, meaning exponential growth, meaning that these deaths have occurred in very short time periods. You can make the comparison to other major disasters, other epidemics, which are terrible, have not necessarily played out on these short time scales. This is a slide for September. So these are the high burden countries in September. In fact, the India numbers probably should be higher because of what I mentioned about reported deaths. Here's the number of children, primary and or secondary affected based on that definition earlier. So sort of all the children who are touched by this. But again, these are minimum estimates. And so it could be a fair bit more in some countries for a whole host of epidemiological data collection reasons. So the United States is a very hard-hit country, as are Mexico, Peru, and Brazil in the Americas. And then we have here highlighted South Africa and India. But there are other countries where, for the size of the country, the toll is huge, right? These are absolute numbers. And so in terms of absolute numbers, there's absolute need. But in terms of the fraction of children affected in a given country, and we work that out for every country in the Lancet publication and in the policy report, which we'll link you to at the end, it can be huge numbers of children, relatively speaking, affected. Okay, so what we have, which I invite you to look at afterwards, and there are links at the end. Here's a link down here, but there's a shorter link at the end, are two different tools, and I will show you those tools in an interactive version. What this highlights is trends over time. This is based on the Our World in Data platform, but it's on our own website. And so you can see the trends, and then you can see, for example, a country like Vietnam. Vietnam did an amazing job in the first part of the epidemic through multiple waves that other countries and other parts of the world experience, absolutely suppressing the virus, but could not keep it up when faced with the Delta variant. And there's been a real wave that has caused many deaths, relatively speaking. Because again, Vietnam has done so well overall, which has left behind just in the last 2 months, children who are affected. Contrast that with some countries that have surged after other surges. And so you can sort of see where these countries are. Let me go to the website so you can see it in an interactive way. So here are some of the big ones that I showed you in the previous slide. Here's India up here. This is just orphanhood that we're counting here. So just children who've lost one or both parents. And so India, September 21st. So this is continuously updated or updated every couple of weeks. India is at almost 250,000, which is pretty astounding. And so just in case this is useful to you, you can go in and you can switch to any countries that you work in. So let's just put in European country just for comparison. And we can see that although absolute numbers are lower in a country like Belgium, it's still, relatively speaking, can be a huge impact. And then one other tool to show, this is the trends, this is the calculator. And so we think that this one is a very simple and useful visualization and numbers. If you need them, if you're talking to colleagues, talking to anyone, you can pick a date and you can pick country. So let's put in, and this breaks it out by those three categories. Back to Lucie.
Thank you so much, Seth. And I don't think we can emphasize how much work went into developing the models for these. And Seth has spared you several hundred pages of equations and complicated tables. But I think what this is really showing us is that we've had this enormous and very, very rapid surge in death of parents and grandparental primary caregivers. And so, of course, what we have to do is move very, very rapidly from identifying these numbers and these constantly rising numbers into action. And what we see is there was a huge surge in media coverage immediately after we published this paper in July. But if you move to the next page, we instantly had to start thinking about what must the response be. And if we move to the next page, Seth, thank you. And what we do know is that we have a substantial amount of knowledge from other epidemics. And I'm just going to look here at some of the evidence from the HIV/AIDS epidemic and compare it to what we're seeing in the COVID epidemic. We can see that there are a range of risks which evidence has shown are far higher for children who are affected by maternal or paternal bereavement or loss of any primary caregiver. We see increases in rates of poverty, and that's poverty both in the family where someone has been lost, but also often in a family, a foster family, or a part of the extended family who take on that child. Or children. Often we'll see children moving in groups of siblings, and that's a substantial additional cost for that family receiving them. We see increased rates of mental health distress, and that seems to depend a lot on how the child's life goes and how much caregiving and nurturing support they get after orphanhood. A child who loses a parent or primary caregiver, if everything else in their life is stable and warm, they have a loving relationship, they will recover and generally recover fully over about a year in terms of mental health. But we see that children where it's a complicated after parental death, where there are real challenges, where there might be real challenges with their caregiving arrangements, or where they're placed in an institution, have very severe and lifetime mental health impacts. We do see increased rates of child abuse for children, and this is both in HIV/AIDS and in COVID, and we also saw this in Ebola. And family violence for children affected by orphanhood. And that's partly because, again, both in the existing family and in host families. That is partly because when there's a severe shock like bereavement in a home, and that comes often with these economic shocks, we see that families are much more stressed. They're dealing with so much more. And we know that families where there's greater stress, there's higher likelihood of shouting, of hitting each other. But we also see that children can be at risk in families they go into, and that's why it's really important to monitor and check that things are going okay. We also see the most severe risks of children going into institutions. Whilst orphanages often seem like an obvious solution, we know that there are very high risks of child abuse and particularly sexual abuse in institutions. We see higher rates of school dropout amongst children affected by orphanhood. That's primarily for economic reasons. And there is quite strong evidence showing that children who are orphaned are at high risk of sexual health risks long term. And that may be because there's not enough available primary caregivers to monitor them in these very risky periods of adolescence that we know can be very challenging for young people. If you move to the next slide. And so what is the package that we can put together? Well, this package, developed by the World Bank, by the World Health Organization, by USAID, and by other colleagues with CDC, has been designed broadly on the amazing work that PEPFAR has done, the US government's PEPFAR program for children orphaned by HIV/AIDS. And it really says, what is a minimum package of care which we can provide so that children can reach their potential in safe and loving families? Well, on the left, of course, you can see that there's a focus on primary healthcare and preventing caregiver death in the first place. And I'm going to talk you through this, and then also the urgent need to prepare family-based support and avoid institutionalization, and what we can do to protect children from poverty, violence, and adversity.
May I interject just for one moment? And I'm sorry to interrupt your flow. I neglected to mention at the outset that these speakers, all three, have kindly consented to accepting questions. And I know my mind is full right now as we go through this, but we don't want to interrupt, other than what I've just done, their presentation. So if you have questions, certainly you may email them on this thread. You may start a chat, and we'll endeavor at the conclusion of their presentations to get those questions asked. So I apologize for interrupting, but I did want to make that clear because my mind is spinning with questions, and I'm sure others are watching are feeling the same way. So I'll be quiet from now on, but thank you for allowing me to interject.
Absolutely no problem. Would welcome questions and also challenges and criticism, because for you to think as family court judges and as judges who are often involved in making these crucial decisions about where children live and what kind of homes they're going to live in, it's absolutely essential that we think this through and understand it. And I think what is really encouraging is that we are able to use this model developed by USAID and PEPFAR, because this has now had very strong support, and there's been testing of whether it's effective. And really, we are lucky that we have something that we have a good sense of what there is to do. This took a lot longer time when we were facing orphanhood by HIV/AIDS to build an evidence base for. Well, let's unpack these a little bit. And Seth, if you take us to the next slide. Let's first talk about prevent. And I think this is the part that actually we're all most familiar with. This is what we read every time we open the newspaper in any country that we're in. There's a clear need to promote equitable vaccine access globally. And we see that some countries have really strong access to vaccines, other countries very much less so. And of course, very worryingly, in many countries, high rates of vaccine hesitancy. And there's been some heartrending stories of families who have decided not to take the vaccine, parents, and have left many children behind after dying of COVID as a result. We also see the need for risk reduction measures that we're very familiar with, safe and timely clinical care, and a focus on the need to try and reach vaccines to as many families as possible. There's also some interesting work talking about how necessary it is to get vaccines to grandparents, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, where there's a huge number of primary caregivers who are grandparents. That's also true within countries like the US, where in particular population groups, there are very high levels of grandparent care. If you move to the next slide. The next crucial element is prepare. And there's some extremely helpful work. Just last year, there was a Lancet commission on deinstitutionalization of children, which summarized the evidence on why we need to avoid orphanages. And this is often counterintuitive to what we think. We think that would be a good response for children who've lost their primary caregivers. But the evidence on orphanages not only shows very much increased rates of physical and sexual abuse. Unfortunately, orphanages are magnets for people who want to have access to children. But there's been some incredible work led by Professor Charles Nelson at Harvard University, which has shown that children who are institutionalized early have long-term deficits in brain functioning and in neurological development as a result of not having a single or a small number of consistent, nurturing and loving caregivers. And so as people making decisions about the lives of children, the evidence is very clear that the best option is to find the best family option, ideally within the existing family or extended family of the child or children, and then to monitor and support that. And then, of course, a crucial aspect is to think about, can we strengthen the support networks around that family? If a child is going to live in a family where there's already 4 children, what can we do to make sure that that family is going to be able to cope with having an additional child without putting an unmanageable strain? And this is on the right, you'll see this is a caseworker in India for working for an organization called World Without Orphans, who's helping to support family strengthening in a context of COVID orphanhood. If we move to the next slide, we can also see and use new evidence to think about how we can protect children who are living after orphanhood. And this is research published in the Lancet a year or so ago, looking at children who are primarily this group, this is in South Africa, who are orphaned by HIV/AIDS. And this study looked at 14 different services for them, and then tested what was the most effective small combination of services. The evidence was clear that a combination of good parenting support, that's particularly parental supervision, going to a safe school, so that's a school where you're not beaten by a teacher, and getting some basic social welfare into the family. That's a basic cash transfer into the family. This was about $20 a month into these families, resulted in substantive improvements for these children and adolescents. So what we see is that a child or young person who gets the combination of good parenting support, goes to a safe school and gets a small cash transfer into the family, has a 50% reduction in abuse, a 33% improvement in good mental health, a 22% for those who are HIV positive themselves, improvement in retention and care, a 34% improvement in their school progression, a 20% reduction in their risk of having high-risk sex, that's usually having an older sugar daddy for very vulnerable girls, and substantial reductions in both violence perpetration and victimization. What we're seeing is that this combination is highly protective on not just one aspect of these children's lives, but on multiple aspects of things that we are most worried about for orphaned children. And it's interesting to note that this parenting support is actually not primarily positive parenting. It's not predicted so much by warmth and loving parenting, although that's very important. What's doing the prediction here is parental supervision. That's knowing who your children's friends are, having rules about what time they come home and what time they come home at night. It's all the things that we hated when we were 15, but those things that have very clear evidence of long-term positive impacts. If we move to the next slide, we'll see how does that operationalize in some of the services that we can provide. Well, there's now very strong evidence for cash plus care models. And you'll see to the right, this is an example in Mexico of a cash plus care system. And this is very simple, actually. It's providing enough money to children's families of vulnerable families that they can afford to eat and send children to school. And that seems to be most effective when we combine it with parenting support. Parenting support isn't about saying that people don't know how to be parents, but it is saying that during a global pandemic, when parenting is under so much strain, and I think we've all felt this over the last year and a half, that parenting during lockdowns and an economic crisis is no joke, that this combination can be very, very effective in improving outcomes for children and for their caregivers. And so there's evidence on effectiveness on reducing poverty, increasing children's access to health and education, improvements in cognitive development and long-term school outcomes for children, and reductions in risk of sexual exploitation for children. If we move to the next slide, We also see with parenting support that there's some exciting new developments which mean that we can deliver remote-based parenting support. Of course, during this pandemic, we have to think about how we can deliver services when we can't actually visit someone. I'm sure many of you have been doing courts remotely and thinking about how different does that make what we're able to do and deliver. Well, what we've seen is that there are now human and hybrid human digital versions of parenting programs where families can receive an offline app which they can use with for example, with no access to the internet, and which an organization can support with phone calls when they can't visit. And that may be particularly important for parents in the immediate aftermath of death, when a family may itself be in quarantine. Encouragingly, we're seeing very low costs of delivery of these kinds of programs and very high levels of cost effectiveness. If we move to the next slide. The last kind of really crucial thing is about safe education and improving life skills. And really, this is very basic. It's about ensuring that children and adolescents can maintain going to school. And while this may seem very obvious, we do have strong evidence that children who are orphaned are more likely to drop out of school. And particularly in an epidemic like this, where children are being pulled out of school for long periods of time, ensuring that they can go back after schools reopen is really essential. And again, very strong evidence of cost effectiveness for this. You move to the next slide, Seth. We've just added into this some links which might be very helpful for you. The first is to a CDC-led policy report on what we can do and deliver. The second, for those who like to look at large amounts of statistical analysis, is the paper in The Lancet, which was published a couple of months ago. Seth's included links to the calculator and the trends, which could be very useful if you're looking at your particular country. And for those who are interested further, there's a CDC and World Bank webinar next week, and we've got a registration link to that. Should we go to the last slide? When we think about this work, and I think it's safe to say that all of us have been doing this over and above our day jobs, as many of you have with your work for children and adolescents during this pandemic. I often think back to the early days of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And this was the words of one of the early campaigners, a famous American. He said, "Someday this crisis will be over. And when that day comes, people will hear the story that once there was a terrible disease all over the world, and a brave group of people stood up and fought so that others might live and be free." And the question is, are we going to be those people? Thank you all so much. And over, I think, to Andrea.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Flaxman, was there anything else that you wanted to add before we get to possibly some?
No, nothing for me.
Thank you. We do have a couple of questions, and I think they're both geared towards sort of practical application to the principles that you've outlined. First of all, let me say that some of those slides were shocking and also sobering from all angles, and in particular, our audience and our organization is made up of a variety of judges and others in the system whose systems are radically different. And so an innovation or a response that might work in one system would not work at all in another continent, another type of a system. So I guess this question is nothing if not entirely practical, and it goes like this: are these professors available to consult courts and other systems to create a modeled local response? In other words, there may be one approach that would work on this continent, but it would not work in another system. So it sounds like they want more of you folks, so I don't know what the restrictions might be about your ability to consult or speak directly to, a court system in Asia, for example.
It's an excellent question, and I'm so glad that people are thinking about this. What I could say is that we are part of a much larger team, and it's a global team of scientists and also people, for example, in the CDC and World Health Organization. And we would absolutely, please do contact us, and we'll find someone within our team who's got expertise in your particular region who can help. It's just wonderful that you're thinking of that next step.
Yeah, the thing that continues to amaze me in a global organization such as our own is many times people focus on the differences in our system. For example, how do you become a judge? How do your rules of procedure work? And they are all over the map. But more amazing to me are the number of areas that are common. You know, the human element, right? It's common. Whatever continent you're on, even though our systems may be vastly different. So if someone's thinking out there of developing a response that will work in their country, I think that probably gave rise to the question. As I say, I think you're following the first rule of show business, leave them wanting more. And so I think there's more that folks want and from your presentation, which has been very excellent. I have a second question here as well that's come up. And again, I think it's nothing if not practical, but is the outline that you have shared in any way proprietary, or I guess they're asking, is that something that they can freely share with their stakeholders back home and their funders and all the people who might be involved in change?
Absolutely free to share, with one proviso that there was a debate between the World Bank and CDC about some arrows, and I realized this version does not have the right pointy arrows. I will add them in, send this to colleagues, and we're absolutely happy to share this around, and perhaps it could be uploaded alongside the presentation once I have the arrows right.
Okay. That's very generous and kind. And for those who are interested, I'm sure it's going to take a minute to absorb some of the statistics that we saw. As I say, they're shocking and sobering. And at least the way my mind works, it takes a minute for that to be absorbed. And I think for allowing them to use that outline will certainly help along those lines. So those are the questions that I have thus far. They're ongoing, and I think in the interest of time, we will go ahead and move on to hear from Andrea. But last word, either Professor Cluver or Flaxman, anything else? We'll move on to Andrea. All right. Well, this is a very, very critical point of today's presentation that I would really be remiss if I failed to mention. But our next speaker is spending part of her birthday here with all of us today. And I think I would be failing if I didn't acknowledge. I don't know that we need to sing or blow out candles on a cake, but as you wish, it's your birthday. No? Okay. 29, I'm told, but I'm not real sure about the math. But nonetheless, wish you many more, and happy birthday to Andrea. Andrea is the district attorney of Sao Paulo state in Brazil, and she's been holding that position since January of 1988, which I guess since you were about 12 years old, if my math is right. Working with children's rights since 1990, both within the juvenile justice system and child protective system. She's currently responsible for the child protection system in the city of Campinas since 2013, working mostly in cases involving children deprived of parental care and in difficult family situations. Andrea serves our organization as part of the executive committee, holding the office of Secretary General of the IAYFJM since 2014. Andrea possessed a master's degree in philosophy and ethics, achieved in 2003 at the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Campinas, and as a master in advanced studies in children's rights in 2007. More impressive than any of that, she served an exchange student right here in the state of Ohio in the United States of America. So we're happy to welcome this Buckeye, as we were known here in Ohio, as well as our General Secretary of the organization. Andrea Santos Souza, please. Andrea, birthday girl.
Well, after this introduction, I just have to thank you, Dave, for your lovely introduction and also for sharing the world that it's my birthday. But anyway, I want also to thank the AIMJF for choosing this relevant topic to be presented in this webinar and to allow me the opportunity to share the table with such respectable professors. And I want also to thank Professors Lucie Cluver and Seth Flaxman that so generously opened space in their busy agenda to be here with us today and present this important, the important findings of their research. As David said, I'm a district attorney in Campinas, and it's a city, it's the second largest city in the São Paulo state. We have now approximately 1,200,000 people. It's a very large city. And as he said, also, my office works specifically with child protection and children deprived of parental care. And since last December, I started noticing a significant increase of judicial procedures of child custody because of death of a parent or main caregiver, mostly grandmothers. And then I thought that first I started to think there was a coincidence. Then I started to say I thought that that this was recurrent. And then I thought that those were the children that came to us to ask for legal representation. And I wondered, what about those that didn't come to court? Those who are invisible from us? Who are they? Where are they? How many are they in the city? And so I started then I came to see the professor's report in, I believe, in April or May. And I said, well, this is something that is happening in the world. So I started a project in the office to study this phenomenon in our city and to induce public policies with the local municipal level, is the only one I have jurisdiction, with three main concerns or challenges. Now, Evangelina, please, if you can start my presentation, I will share with you a small presentation about this project and other actions that are taking place in Brazil right now. So, yeah, next, please. The first challenge is visibility. We have to identify children in orphanhood due to COVID. And then we have, for orphanhood, we think of unilateral or bilateral orphanhood. That means one parent or both and loss of a primary caregiver. As I said, mostly grandmothers. And then the challenge is to grant legal representation to those children to avoid mostly separation of siblings, illegal adoptions, foster care placements, and institutionalization. And also prevention of school dropout, child marriage, child labor, and sexual exploitation, and all kinds of child abuse. And the strategies that we are taking are to identify is to analyze the death certificates due to COVID since March to 2020. We had until now. This search is not finished yet because every month the notaries sent me the death certificates of last month. So far we identified 454 orphan children. 2 of them in bilateral orphanhood in a very short period of time, like 15, 20 days. And there's a case of a very sad case of a 6-year-old girl who told the child protection services that she wants to become a little star in heaven so that she can go be with her parents. We identify 6 newborn babies that the mothers died right after birth, and 2 large families, one with 7 and the other one with 5 children, and 60 children in early childhood that for the Brazilian law, well, for everybody is less than 6 years old. Those cases for me were the most urgent ones. So I asked the Child Protection Services to go after them and see how they are, and they are monitoring them. You know, because my job is not to tackle individual cases unless there's a need of a judicial measurement, but to induce public policies for the whole. But these I found very very urgent and that need a specific care. So another strategy is discussions with child protection services to identify children who lost primary caregiver, because these are not described in the death certificates. And so this is ongoing now. They're going to search for these children. And discussions with schools and child protection services to tackle school dropouts and grant priority in first labor programs. This is in progress. Next, please, Evangeline. The second challenge is to ensure food security and basic living conditions to children and their families. So check food security and housing conditions of children and their families, identify possible heritage or pension left to children, and ensure that it's being used in their favor. As a strategies, we have municipal law in discussion to implement cash transfer benefit to 1,500 families with children affected by orphanhood from COVID-19. I had an update yesterday, and it's still in the legislature being discussed, but there's a very good chance to be approved by the end of October. And I told them, this is the first municipal law in Brazil that I know of for a cash transfer benefit to families affected by COVID-19. But I told the mayor that I'm very happy, but not satisfied, because what I want at the end is a cash transfer benefit to the child, not to the family. And for as long as she or he will need it. And then we have discussions with the municipal authorities to include these children and their families in food security emergency programs. This is also in progress. They are having extra whatever conditions they have in the city for food security. They are being preferential support. Then discussions with municipal authorities to implement a rent benefit to families in vulnerability. This is in progress, but since we have the other law in discussion, and I decided not to push too much. So discussions with public lawyers to give priority to child custody procedures, especially the public lawyers. And this is already done. So when we see that there's a child that needs legal representation, these lawyers will give preference to these cases because they have a lot of work. And then training those responsible for child protection services to identify any heritage or benefit for the child. This is also in progress, because the parent may have some labor benefit that he was he was had, I don't know, a case in court, and then the family doesn't know. So we have to identify if there's any pension or any insurance or something that was left for the child by their parents. Next, please. And then the third one is mental health. So the challenges are learn to identify if the child is in mourning, respect the time of the child to overcome mourning, and grant the right to the memory of parents and ancestors, especially to children in early childhood. Right, this is the right to identity, right to know their history and to respect the history of the child. And this especially to those newborn babies that might not even know that they had a mother, biological mother. And then the strategies are to train those responsible for child protection services, teachers, and other schools employees to identify child's behaviors that indicate emotional suffering and the need of psychological support. Because now the schools are reopening here, so the child might come and they have lack of understanding in class, not want to do the things in class, and are maybe like rebellious or something else. And this is not to be punished, but to be understood that might be that might indicate some emotional suffering. And then induce public policy for specialized psychological support to children and their families to overcome the mourning period. And this is regardless the economic condition of the child. And also because we need specialized professionals of psychological field, psychologists, to deal with this mourning. And induce, this is the last of the last, induce the construction of a memorial to victims from COVID-19 in the city. This is for the end of the end. Next, please. Now we have other actions also in Brazil. We have a Northeast Region Consortium. There are 9 states, and they did what we call a Projeto Acolhe, that means project to welcome, let's say rough introduction. It's a set of public policies to grant cash transfer benefits and secure legal representation, food security, housing, and schooling to children. This is for children, not for the families. And most state laws are still in discussion. I have, then there's Maranhão State, that's one of the state also in Northeast region. And I have a very good friend, also a DA, Marcio, and he's doing a very good job also there. And now they have a state law, was the first one in Brazil, is a state law to grant cash transfer benefits to each child in orphanhood situation due to COVID-19. And this is until the legal age of 18 years old. And so like that family of 7 children, they will have 7 benefits. Then in São Paulo state, there has more or less a population of 46.6 million people. I'm in discussion with the state legislator, and she saw the project and she liked it, and she presented the law, state law, to grant cash transfer benefits to each child also into legal age, and to implement public policies to ensure food security, housing, schooling, labor protection, psychological support. This law was presented last August, so it's still in discussion, and I hope it will pass soon. And then there's some discussions in the Senate to issue laws similar to those above, but then in national level. And this is also there's nothing presented as I know of, but they're still discussing things. So these are the actions that I know of in Brazil right now. We might have some others, but I don't know yet. Next, please. So, as we've seen, and then also by what the professor said, we have a situation in front of us that maybe is not yet understood for everyone. And we have to realize that we have a whole generation of children from all over the world that will spend their childhood and possibly their lives in emotional pain and extreme vulnerability because of their loss from COVID-19, because of the loss of just one disease. And in years to come, this generation will ask us what we were doing when this was happening. And I hope, sincerely hope, that we'll have some good things to tell them. And that's it. Thank you. And here's my contact if anybody wants it, and also for of the AIMJF. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrea. There is a question here, and I'll try and summarize it. It actually seems like you've been able to achieve a unified approach or response to the pandemic, and maybe, I guess, how to get that. You don't represent the judges. You're in essence a litigant or an advocate on behalf of one side, but it seems like that you've been able to develop a unified approach to address what for Brazil in particular has been a devastating crisis. How are you able to do that? I think we all face that in our localities. How do you get the court, the prosecutor, the defense lawyers, the other stakeholders involved in all making change in a positive direction?
Well, in Brazil, the DA's office has constitutional mission, we call them. We can induce, as I said, public policies. And I don't know how the other DA's office in the, we're not just prosecutors, you know, we can, there's a branch that also works with human rights. And that's the one that I'm in. And specifically human rights for children, right? So I can do that. I do some extra judiciary procedures in my office, and then I just go to the court if there's something that the law says that the public authorities have to do and they are not doing. So going to court is the last resource. So what I do is really negotiations with by negotiations I said, look, there's this situation, and I present them the situation that we are having, and mostly because the child protection services tell me we have other cases also of there is lacking in there's not a public policy to tackle that situation. And this one I'm presenting now is the case of orphanhood by COVID. And so I did the research. I found these 454 cases, and then I present them. I said, look, we have these right now. Until now, we have these. And now I have to find where are the children that lost their primary caregiver. And so they were not aware of that. You know, because of course they're looking for the health measurements, you know, not to get people sick or to get enough oxygen or to get enough hospital beds or whatever. So I said, look, there's as the document from the Imperial College said, there's a hidden pandemic, you know, that there's not being seen. So this is more or less my job, you know.
So I'll ask this question, the same one that really was asked of the prior speakers. Are you able to be, I guess, consultant may be the wrong word, but you're open to others contacting you who may want to learn from your efforts and adapt it to their own
Yes,
situation?
of course. Yes, of course. More than happy to be. Yes, of course.
And
Because this is something for the world, you know, it's something that happens. This pandemic is very democratic, you know, it gets every country and every class, social class, and everybody, you know, every race, everything. So the thing is the response that we have to them, to it, that it might be different.
yeah, democratic, non-discriminatory, right? It affects all of us, whatever our station in life or situation, government configuration. And I guess that's what makes it a pandemic, but it's been tragic. And our thoughts certainly go out to you, because it does seem Brazil, even in the slides from the previous speakers, unfortunately in front of the pack. And so we certainly hope that that changes. And thank you for your efforts. I didn't promise this earlier, but would our panelists like to ask any questions about each other's slides or presentation in any way? Okay. Apparently they have a pact not to ask hard questions of one another, so that's fine.
I just want to say that I can say I'm glad, because there's no way to be glad in this situation. But I was very, I don't know, well, glad is the word, that empirically, I'm trying to do exactly what these professors said that it has to be done. You know, so it's more like intuitive, but we are in the right path. You know, this is I have a nice thing to tell my the municipal authorities. Said, look, we are going in the right path. You know.
The feeling is mutual. I will follow up offline, but we don't have much or any direct information from death certificates. So the fact that you've been able to collect that is something that we would love to be able to understand how you've done that and how it compares. If we were to just do our own estimates, but for Sao Paulo, what would we find? And so we will definitely follow up with you.
Well, in Brazil, I don't know the other countries, but in Brazil, in the death certificate, it has to be written if the deceased left any children. So this was the worst part of it. And it's still not complete, because my staff, we were getting mentally or emotionally sick, because we have to look at, to read every death certificate to find out who left small children. So, and the first notary sent us 1,800 death certificates. So, because the city is very large, a lot of people died there, but they don't live there. But we had to look at anyway. So it's so sad to see that people like 39, 29, 40 years old, they were dying and leaving these children behind, you know. So this is really, really a hard thing. So we stopped a little bit now, because we already have something to start working. And now we are beginning again to do that, but it's very, very heavy, you know, emotionally very heavy.
So I will take one more minute to say that this is news to me. We've been talking with countries and partners about the idea of adding a line on death certificates for dependents. So this is an open call to anyone in the audience. If this already exists in your country, maybe the data exists on paper and it's difficult to go through. I understand that, but maybe it's possible, or maybe someone could find funding to digitize it and then to do it automatically. If you're in a country where death certificates list dependents, let us know, because that is not something we were aware of. And if you're considering, or if you're in a position where you could talk to a country about policies around that, I mean, it's actually sort of surprising that very few, if any, well, not if any, we now know, very few countries collect that sort of information. Your Honor, this is not something in the United States that I'm aware of, correct?
No, I don't believe so. And of course, there's some variance from state to state, but yeah, that's not generally what I'm familiar with here at all. So,
and it has to, you know, old people die, right? If young people die, it's a tragedy, and we read about it in an obituary. It says so-and-so is a survivor, but now we have this worldwide pandemic where people in the prime of their lives are dying.
Yes, if I may say something, my colleague in Maranhão that I said, he did something more. The health system have to inform if the person, when the person gets to the hospital, even if he doesn't die, if the person has a son or a daughter minor, and also if he's the caregiver of somebody. And so this is in the state, they have to inform the DA's office and the child protection services, even if they have a caregiver, if he's the caregiver of a minor. So this is a plus, you know. I'm also trying to do this in my city.
Amazing.
So let me just follow up on Professor Flaxman mentioned that he's interested in input, and you know our audience has a role in that too. So you folks who are either on this live chat or who will watch it recorded in English or any other language, if you can communicate information back to this panel and Professor Flaxman in particular regarding this issue, I'm sure it would be welcomed. And again, this is your role as an audience. We welcome your input. So I think we can use the chat for that. And I don't know if there's another address we should use directly. You're welcome to give that address, but certainly we'll get it to you, Professors Flaxman, in any way, Ms. Culver, if we do receive that input. But we'd love to have the audience's input on that or any other issue that you find pertinent to this discussion. We appreciate your involvement. Again, this may take some days because it's going to be replayed, and probably the majority of our audience will certainly come from those who are watching it on a delayed basis. So, Ms. Cluver, anything further that you'd like to say, and we'll conclude this here.
Thank you so much, and Andrea, it was really humbling to hear of the incredible work that you've been doing. I think there is one thing that I think we're going to have to keep in mind, particularly in countries where we have slow vaccine rollout, and the CDC currently estimates that most countries, particularly in the global south, will have up to 5 years of vaccine rollout to come. That the numbers that we are seeing now are going to be rising very rapidly. We've already seen, since these findings that you saw that Seth displayed, that those numbers have gone up rapidly and substantially since then. And with new estimates from India and new numbers coming from India, we're looking at a number that is very much closer to 5 million by now. And this really means that we're going to need to think, right now we're thinking of, perhaps in each country, thousands or hundreds of thousands, but we may need to start thinking of challenges of millions. And that may mean that we need to take some of these decisions and policy decisions up to a higher level where we can start thinking about mass provision of support. And we may not have that much time to do this. And so really I just want to say thank you so much for inviting us, and thank you for being concerned and for joining this webinar for such a topic like this.
Excellent. Okay. Anything else for the good of the order? Well, let me just add my thanks certainly to these presenters who've given unselfishly of their professional time, and also sharing the deliverable that's been their work throughout this crisis, and it's ongoing. So certainly we recognize the value of your contribution. It's been made clear here today in this presentation, which could not have been effective without really the vision of Andrea and her reactions, as well as the learned work that's gone on by these professors. And so this has been, I believe, a very topical and valuable experience here this morning. Let's keep the conversation going. Unfortunately, the issues are still present and will not be going away. And so this has been a good education, I think, for all who've participated. If you want to become further involved in our organization, the IAYFJM, we would love to have you as a member. If your membership needs renewed, or if you wish a new membership, please contact us. Again, you can do that through chat, and certainly we will be following up with you. And so you can have the full resources that are available to you as a member. On behalf of the IAYFJM, and in particular our president, Marta Pascual of Argentina, our General Secretary, Andrea, who you've heard from here today, as well as our Deputy General Secretary, Lise Gagnon from Quebec, Canada, our Treasurer, Anne-Catherine Hott from Switzerland, and also Eduardo Rezende Mello, editor of our publication, The Chronicle. We wish to thank you so much for participating and taking part in this opportunity. And so with that, I'd like to say, gracias por todos, hasta la próxima. Also, merci beaucoup et à la prochaine, mes amis. Thank you very much for participating, my friends and colleagues. I wish you a pleasant day, and happy birthday, Andrea, by the way. Thank you all. That will conclude this presentation.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, and lovely to see everyone. Thank you, Anna, for sharing that.
No problem.
And
Pleasure.
I hope you have a lovely rest of your birthday, Andrea. Bye-bye.
Thank you.